everyone. I have switched to the headset because even though I think the headset looks kind of dumb, the upgrade in sound quality is just too good. I am eventually going to get an actual good mic, but this is going to be the compromise for now. This sound quality should be better than previous videos, but anyways, to the topic of the video, this will be my spoiler-free, followed by a couple spoiler thoughts, but not many, but majority spoiler-free review of Gardens of the Moon, an annoyingly small book for how much is in here. Like, you see this and you're like, oh, it's probably like 200 pages and just like a quick read. Nope, tiny font, 600 and something pages. Anyways, that's not very related to the book. So, let's talk about it. Alright, so, as I mentioned in my last couple reviews, I'm switching more to saying like more qualitative about the book than how much I liked it, and I think if I were to describe the reading experience for this book, it's relatively unique. If I were to just capture the experience, this is my best effort. Imagine you're in a Song of Ice and Fire world, but this is only going to work for people who know anything about Game of Thrones, but most of you probably do, and it's the only comparison I could come up with. If instead of following the normal story, we followed a part of the Valyrian Empire at like the height of their power, and it just threw you into a war like that was 3/4 done, and it was just like, yeah, figure things out. It like you didn't know anything about the world before that. You don't know what the Valyrians are or anything, and it was just like, but there you go, war between some other force with the Valyrian Empire. That's kind of, I think the reason I'm using that is because this is, a lot of the time when you look at how dark a book is and like the tone and the level of magic, for some reason they tend to correlate. Most books that are darker seem to have less magic involved, like A Song of Ice and Fire, The First Law, etc. tend to be very minimalist magic. This book, I wouldn't quite call it grimdark, but I see why some people do call it grimdark. It's pretty dark on the how dark it is spectrum. Probably like a good 8 out of 10 dark. But it's also very, very high magic. It's one of the most high magic books I've read. And while, not everyone has magic, there are lots of supremely powerful magical beings. And that's one reason the scale of this book feels so large just from the start. It's not necessarily like the biggest story in terms of space it takes up or amount of characters of any book one in a series. I think Dune is larger scale than this book. I think A Game of Thrones is probably larger scale than this book. But the reason it feels so large scale is right from book one, like the godlike beings are in the fight, and they tend to, for most series, they tend to show up later in the series. Gardens, I'm sure there will be more later in the series, but here it's like, hey, it's book one, let me introduce you to Animander Rake. So that'd be my my comparison for the kind of tone and feel of this book. And when I read the first 150 pages of this book, really, it's one of those books that doesn't know what the word part is. It's split into book one, book two, etc. I had no clue what was going on in book one. I finally kind of started to figure it out, and I'm like, okay, these pieces, and then it's like, boom, all different POV characters. That being said, the all different POV characters, I did kind of figure out what was going on there quite a bit sooner. I'd say I started off very confused, and then I became less confused, and I was at kind of only low levels of confusion for a while, and then near the end I jumped up to being confused about some things again. So yeah, that'd be my description of kind of the feel of the book. I think I wasn't able to get emotionally invested in any of the characters in this book, unfortunately. So I can't really describe what kind of emotions I feel. I thought some things were cool. This didn't have any like emotional gut punches for me. Which I think is probably the biggest thing that held it back from being a book that I like more. But it's very like epic and big, but didn't manage any emotional gut punches. Anyway, since normally I don't really do the pros and con review, but I'm going to move on to pros and cons because for this book, I have really clear pros and cons. And I think the number one thing this did well was building atmosphere, where it's like there will be a character who has like an aura about them, and they will enter scene in the book, and I'll be like, did they walk in the room in me? Like, it's almost like you really feel their presence. And Steven Erickson just seems to have the ability to make relatively small scale fights just seem epic. That was, in my opinion, the biggest pro to this book. I thought it was, in terms of that, it was excellent. The biggest con of this book, I already talked about, was just how confusing it was at times, and sometimes it feels like the writing is deliberately obtuse. Like, Steven Erickson, it's like just will for the first time refer to someone by their name, and then after that refer to them as their title. Like, you meet someone named Animander Rake, and then it's like, okay, that's Animander Rake, but he's not really referred to as Animander Rake for most of the time. He's referred to as like the Lord of the Moonspawn, and sometimes you just kind of have to figure out which title goes with which people. You're not going to be expressly told. There's also, he seems to have there was an interesting example of show and not tell, and that was in quick succession when we entered a city. He used the word like Mokensin, belfry, the French word for party, he used fete, and turban, which are all words with very different national origins. Like a Mokensin is specifically like a Native American shoe, a belfry would be like a specifically European bell tower, etc. Which was kind of annoying, but also was kind of a cool way to show that the city you were in was a cultural melting pot. Stuff like that, where I'm kind of like, I get what you're doing, and it's clever, but it also was a little bit annoying. But I got over it, and he does like those words, by the way. He's not like, I'm going to use these words once. He's like, I will use these words all of the times. The next pro I'm going to bring up was the scheming in this book, because this book had quite a bit of scheming. Which is why you'll see some of the negative, like, 1-star reviews on Goodreads was, this is just people talking, which is never really a criticism I've gotten, because people talking is definitely a thing happening. And the people talking in this, and scheming, was very, very well done. I would say, along with tone, scheming is the thing where I'm like, if I had to list a thing where I think it's just clearly something Erickson is very good at writing, even in book 1, which I have pretty much universally heard is the worst or among the worst books in the series. But I can't imagine the scheming getting worse from here, and it was really good here, where it wasn't like one character outsmarting everyone, or a bunch of groups being dumbasses, and like one person being smart. It was always hard to tell which person was actually one step ahead on the scheming, because it's like someone would say, oh yeah, this is my plan, and you're like, oh, that's a great plan, and then you get to the next point of view, and that person is aware that this is what they're going to do, but yeah, so at times it wasn't clear who was going to come out on top, and it also didn't feel like an author was just deliberately making people stupid in order to make the person they wanted to win come out on top. So I thought scheming-wise, it was very well done. Next con is something a lot of people won't care about, and some people like, but Erickson has talked about how he wants to keep magic very mysterious. I didn't like the way magic was used in this book at all. This is totally a personal preference choice. I'm sure some people liked it, but I thought it was... I'm okay with soft magic, but I thought it was soft magic used in the way that soft magic isn't good at, where it kind of killed the stakes for me, because it's like, okay, you've got these super magically powerful beings on this side, and the super magically powerful beings on this side, so at times it was just like, okay, so whichever side is more powerful will win. Like, all these other pieces just kind of seem irrelevant, and I have no way of like, yeah, there's the side I kind of want to win, but I think he's going to be a long-running character, so I'm pretty sure he's not going to just die. So, is he just magically powerful enough to destroy the other two people? I have no way of knowing. I have no frame of reference. And also, the use of magic in this way did sometimes lead to, sometimes people would be in danger, and it's like, oh, that's okay, magic. Or some outside force we hadn't heard of would come and save them. So there was not a large dose of Deus Ex Machina, but also some Deus Ex Machina, which I'm sure is like, you know, maybe on your third reread you could see it coming and it's like, oh, look, there's foreshadowing here. But as a first reading experience, there's some things that there's just no way to see coming, where it just kind of like feels like, oh, yeah, magic, that had to happen. Um, so in terms of the way magic is used, I'm not a fan of this style of it being used at all, because it seems like it's solving problems often, and also super unclear limits, which is just, it's the biggest weakness of soft magic. I think it might help contribute to the tone and the feel of it being epic, so I guess, and that might be a pro of it, but overall, just not a fan of that. And those are kind of my biggest pros and biggest cons. Um, with There's one kind of in the middle, and that's the characters. I thought the characters in this book were interesting, but I wasn't invested in any of them, and I'm also not sure what a bunch of their motivations were. Like, I don't really know what the goal of a lot of the peoples are. So it's hard to know, like, it's hard to know whether they're acting against their motivations, because I don't know what their damn motivations are. So, overall, I would say I did like this book. And if you're someone who doesn't care about being confused and likes soft magic and doesn't mind Deus Ex Machina, then I imagine you will also like it as well. If you're someone who really wants to know character motivations, doesn't likes following mostly one thread, and really likes hard magic, then I don't know if you'll like this at all. Also, one thing I'll mention is I don't actually think this book has more characters than a lot of other epic fantasies. Like, obviously it has more characters than something like the Dresden Files, but if you compare it to the other really big series, like A Song of Ice and Fire, Stormlight, Wheel of Time, etc., I think it has a similar amount of characters. It's just less focused on who the protagonist is. So it's just like you'll get the story. Yeah, that's what I'm going to stick with. It's way less focused on the story of one person, and it's more telling the entire story of this entire event, not specifically the story of one person. Which I wouldn't say it was a pro or con. I'm sure for some people, there will be some people who absolutely love that, and some people who think that's stupid and they want one person to follow. For me, on the constant POV swapping, I was kind of mixed. There was one aspect of the POV swapping that made me want to punch the book, and that is that in this book, Steven Erickson, a huge number of times, switched point of view mid-paragraph. Like, no breaks. You're in this person's head, and then, nope, you're actually just in this person's head now. That was annoying. That felt deliberately obtuse. Like, that was like, Steven Erickson's got this complicated story, and he's like, I'm going to make you more confused. Which, you didn't need to make me more confused, Erickson. It's already complicated. So, that was an aspect of it that annoyed me. But, still, the scheming and tone and world was enough, and interesting characters was enough to still make this a positive book. My rating for it is going to be a 6.3 out of 10. I'm about 400 pages into Dead House Gates, and similar pros and cons, except I'm way more attached to the characters of Dead House Gates, so that's like one of the most important factors, and also it doesn't POV swap mid-paragraph, so it will almost certainly get a better score, and I think hard to imagine someone thinking it's worse than Gardens of the Moon so far. Like, I've only read half of it, but the first half was, I think, way better than the first half of Gardens of the Moon. Anyway, I am going to cut to a brief spoiler section, so if you have not read The Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erickson, I will be having reviews for the entire series. I think after book 3, I'm just only going to do spoilers. This kind of, the main target for this review is someone who wants to know what's the first reading experience of Gardens of the Moon. After that, it's pretty much all the Malazan fans can be entertained, I guess. I'm assuming it's like me with Dresden. I like watching reviews of Dresden and Wheel of Time and Stormlight, even though I've already watched the books anyway. But I'm going to move to spoilers, so get out if you haven't read it. Okay, Malazan spoiler people, what's up? So, earlier I mentioned Steven Erickson can take not huge fights and just make them feel epic. My ultimate example of that is Animander Rake versus the Shadowhounds. Character turned away from it, barely saw it, it was over in about 0.3 seconds, and it was between like 5 people. And it was epic as hell. I was like, when I read that, I was like, that was fucking sick. Anyway, that would be the ultimate example of where Steven Erickson absolutely killed atmosphere for me. But really, the spoiler talk we can only talk about one thing. There is only one thing that can be talked about in the spoiler talk, and that is Croup. What the hell is Croup? Not what the hell is he like not human, but just what is going on with Croup. So Croup, I think, my opinion on whether I liked or disliked Croup probably switched about, how many pages is this book? 1 second. 666. That's ironic. Including the glossary. So I think my opinion on Croup probably switched about 600 times while reading this. I was like, this guy's just stupid and annoying, to Croup is amazing. When it's like, he's the spy master, I was just like, okay, that's pretty cool. Alright, so anyway, I want to know, for the Malazan people, are you pro-Croup or anti-Croup? Also, all of you talk about how the theme is compassion. There's definitely a few parts where it's like, okay, here's a minor gripe I have that maybe I could have talked about non-spoiler, but some people in this book seem to be able to read minds. And I'm curious on rereads to see where it's just like, they'll be watching someone talk and they'll be like, I think they're thinking this. And I'm going to be really curious if I ever read the series, if the most of the time they're just dead wrong. That's what I suspect. I suspect, like, on rereads, you'll know what the person is actually thinking, because you know that character better. And I suspect that all the people who think they can read minds are actually just completely wrong. So I take it back. This isn't a minor gripe. Now I want to know. Are just people ridiculously overconfident in their ability to read minds? Who knows? That'd be interesting. What else is there to talk? Oh yeah, Tattersail is now a 6-year-old. Apparently. Okay. I think Tattersail was like an example of when I realized I'm just not at all really invested in the characters, where it's like Tattersail's one of the main characters, and it's like, oh, she dead now, I guess, and doing this weird magic thing where she almost kills Crone. Leave Crone alone, damn it. And I was like, oh, I guess we're not reading about Tattersail now. Same thing with like Adjunct Lorne. I was like, oh, I guess Lorne is dead. Okay. And I think that's true for almost any of the characters. That being said, they're all a lot of them are interesting. Like, I want to know more. And I think, in terms of like having characters who are like forces of nature, Erickson seems to be pretty damn good on that front. And also, it's almost always a gripe for me. I'm almost always not satisfied by how authors write like a 20,000-year-old character or a ridiculously old character. But I think I really liked the way Erickson wrote like the super, super ancient beings. They actually felt like they were 20,000 years old. That's been some of my gripes for some books I've read this year. I think I got, if you want another author who does that well, I think Jim Butcher writes really old characters really well, but I could see Erickson surpassing him as my favorite writers of very, very old people. I've got annoyed by that in like books by like John Gwynne, where there's a point of view of a giant who's like 800, and it just feels like the point of view of a 40-year-old. Anyway, that's it. So that's a thing I thought this did really well. I'm curious to get back to the continent for Memories of Ice. I'm basically hoping that it will be the same story here, but it will do as good of a job as getting me attached to the characters as this book did. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Gardens of the Moon. I didn't really have that much spoiler-wise. What does having 7 Warrens mean, quick, Ben? Anyway, Warrens, whatever. I'll figure it out. Thanks for watching, everyone. This was not a coherent spoiler talk at all.